Brought to you by JMR Rentals, professional digital cinema and broadcast equipment rentals in Brooklyn, New York. JMRNY.com. Hello and welcome to No Rest for the Weekend. I'm Jason Godbey, and joining me via Zoom today, all the way from New Zealand, he is the director of the new documentary feature Dawn Raid, Mr. Oscar Kightley. Welcome, Oscar.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Lovely to be talking to you from the bottom of the world.
Yeah, man, you might hold the record for furthest away guest.
Awesome.
I've interviewed people in Australia, I've interviewed people in Japan, but I think New Zealand is just that much further, right?
Yeah, unless you interview someone from Antarctica next, I think I'll have the record until you talk to someone else from New Zealand.
All right, so you're technically in the future there. Hopefully things will get better by the time we catch up to you. The future is bright. I know it's like summertime down here. I'm freezing here in Brooklyn, but you're nice and warm down there. It's very interesting, and I'm glad to talk to you because I really like the film. I thought it was really well done, and it was a really interesting story that I had not heard before. But before we get into the film, I want to talk to you about you a little bit. So, how did you? I know that you do some acting as well as directing. How did you come to show business? What's your origin story?
Well, reading. I mean, just to kind of start way back at the beginning, I just always loved reading as a kid. Um, I used to read anything, and so that made me want to be a writer. And so when I eventually left school and got into my adulthood, I became a journalist. But I always kept this penchant for making things up, and that's no good when you're a journo, even though that happens a lot these days. But I just found myself moving into theatre and then television, and then did some acting. But I always wanted to direct, I guess, and stoked that Dawn Raid, uh, was the film that I got to make, and also that it's finding eyeballs around the world instead of me just walking around and showing all my friends on my laptop.
For people who haven't seen it, tell me what the movie is about, and then kind of tell me how it came to be.
So Dawn Raid is the name of the movie, and that's the eponymous title. That's the name of the record label that we look at, and it's a hip hop label that started in New Zealand. And people might be surprised to hear the words hip hop and New Zealand in the same sentence, but we're just as prey to all the cultural influences from the United States over the last couple of centuries as anywhere else. And so hip hop really took a foothold here, particularly with the indigenous Maori community. And also we have quite a big Pacifica settlement. I'm not sure how many Samoan people there are in New York, maybe more on the other coast, but there's a huge population here. And so hip hop just really settled as a storytelling medium that a certain part of our community really grabbed onto. And Dawn Raid was a label that began in the late 90s and really kind of did a lot. And they really kind of built a bridge between what was happening in New Zealand and also a lot of great artists in the States. They work with some great, all the big heavyweights, but they kind of flew high, and then I guess kind of crashed and then kind of rose again. And that's what this film's about. It could be a cautionary tale about two guys with a dream and all the mistakes you shouldn't make when starting a business. But I prefer to look at it as a story of inspiration in terms of having an idea in an environment where that idea shouldn't work, but just your sheer guts. And I'm really glad that you enjoyed it, Jason, because I reckon even if you don't know New Zealand or know this label or even know hip hop, I think it's a real human story about trying to go for something and how it doesn't always come off, but still good things can come out of it.
Just to give you my background, like I said, I enjoyed the film, but the most I know about New Zealand, they're like the Lord of the Rings movies,
which,
like a lot
which
of
is
people,
most people. Yeah.
which is probably 90% of the people here in the States. And I am not a hip hop fan, like at all. I didn't grow up listening to hip hop. A lot of the acts that you guys talked about, I was not familiar with, but the music in the movie is great, and I think these guys are just really interesting guys. Like I think their story is really interesting because They did not go to Wharton. They didn't come from rich families. I wanted to ask you, like, how did the story come to you? Did you report on this as a journalist first, or like, how did you come to know these guys?
I was a friend of the guys, and but also a fan. I was coming up as a writer and kind of screenwriter and playwright at the same time, so I was a fan. So when the company GFC decided, wanted to make a doco on these guys, it was a kind of a whatever happened to those guys, the full story of what they experienced. So I guess through my experience as a Samoan storyteller in New Zealand, I guess that's why I was selected to kind of helm this story, and that's how it came to me. But yeah, to these two guys and at the core of this are the real stars of the film, even though there's a lot of big names in there. And it is, they started their empire because it became an empire by through selling T-shirts from their car boot, and I don't know if stories like that are still possible, like these days you hear fantastical stories about startups and, starting on a sniff of an oily rag of a budget, but it happened at the same time when the music industry and entertainment was changing so much. I mean, podcasts weren't around then. The idea that you could talk to someone from across the world for 20 minutes and that it then be shared, globally just wasn't a thing. And so these guys had a record company kind of in the last era when you could have that traditional model of a record company. They started selling cassettes. By the time they finished, even CDs were gone. And so they had to negotiate that whole time. And so, as well as a story about these two guys, it's kind of a micro case of what happened to this company because of all the forces around the world. We're talking streaming, pirating, just how all that impacts on you.
Was it difficult getting, because you have a lot of archival footage and things like that? So, like, how long a journey are we talking about from start, I want to make this movie, to actually being able to finish the movie?
We were lucky because these guys in the film, they started carrying a handy cam around with them way back in the late 90s, and they documented everything. So when we came to look for archive, they were like, yeah, sure, have a look at this. They'd tell me a story about how one of their rappers, they took him to New York and he ended up recording with Inspector Dick from the Wu-Tang Clan. And if that's just a story, you're like, yeah, right, I don't believe that. But he had the tape. He had the footage of them actually working together. And so, yeah, I mean, it wasn't easy. Sometimes some of the artists didn't want to talk to us because of the way things ended up between them, but they all did eventually. And it's a story that's still kind of ongoing. I sliced up a 10-year period of their history, but of course it's still going, and they're still making music, and all the artists are still making music. But it was hard as a friend too to kind of take all that pain and sorrow, and occasionally betrayal, because it's your friends don't always share that stuff in their lives with you. And here I was asking them to say it on camera for a film that would go global. So it wasn't always easy, but I'm really stoked with the progress. And we just got it finished before COVID shut the world down. We were in the edit. Thankfully, we'd done all our shooting before the country went into lockdown in March of 2020. And those were the last few months that we were able to finish the film and edit it.
I mean, that seems to be the question I'm asking everybody. Like, was this pre-COVID, post-COVID?
Yeah, well, because we our last filming was in New York in November of 2019, and of course COVID-19 hits in the December of that year, and of course by January, February of the next year. So I feel like that was, I don't know when I'm going to be able to get back to New York again, but it was like a window of time that we got to New York and LA and did our filming there, because the borders closed not long after that. So there's been a lot of fortuitous things about this project.
You mentioned like knowing these guys. Do you think you would have gotten the same film had you been an outsider? Like, if you've been someone like me, have you been like a white guy from New York who'd gone down there to investigate this? Do you feel like they were able to talk to you because you were kind of from the community and you knew them?
Yeah, absolutely. The hardest thing for these two was trust, because they're not only sharing their pain, but they're also sharing the pain of the artist that they worked with. And I totally know that because they were talking to me that they were able to. It was even hard for them at times because we're friends, but I think ultimately I mean, they're such entertainers and they're such showmen that they would have talked to you as well, and they would have been quite open and forthright. But I do feel like having a 20-year relationship with these guys as kind of friends and acquaintances definitely helped in terms of what we were able to elucidate from them for the screen.
You got this film distributed through Universal Pictures, which is great, major distributor. How did that work? Was it because of they had a prior relationship with Universal in the past?
Yeah, I mean, they were signed to Universal in New Zealand. Of course, the two arms are totally different companies, so it's not like their distributors here got them in. But GFC, the company that makes the film, they've made a lot of really beautiful films and documentaries, major films, and they've got a good relationship with Universal. So when GFC kind of added this to their slate, I think also because of the previous connection with Universal and New Zealand music, I think that would have helped. But yeah, I mean, me and brother D and Andy, the two guys in the film, we for us one of the most exciting moments of the film is at the beginning when you see the universal spinning world. Just because there are when in films there are certain beginnings like the MGM lion, like the Columbia Pictures lady walking up the stairs, like the horse with the wings, but later of a certain generation, you will recognize certain distribution, stings at the beginning of a film that just seems to help put your film in a certain, category and gives it a flashness.
You get that feeling this is a real movie.
Yeah, yeah,
This is a
exactly.
real movie, and we made it kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
This takes place mainly in South Auckland, and you talk a bit that about in the film. Is that where you wound up filming the other interviews and things like that?
Yeah, I was definitely rooted in South Auckland. For those not from New Zealand, South Auckland it was as a part of Auckland's our biggest city, and the southern part of it is traditionally the has challenges when it comes to socioeconomics, and so it's an area that always had bad press from the media, crime and poverty and stuff, and so it had a certain reputation. People that live there know it's actually a beautiful place of family and community, but convincing the wider world of that was harder when the kind of depictions of it were always so negative, and that's another thing that made this real special. They didn't come from, as you say, they didn't come from rich families. They probably began their business in the poorest part of the city. Um, just to kind of school you on what South Auckland is like. But when you look, so many great artists have come. I don't know what it is about struggle that seems to produce great music and really determined entrepreneurs and figures. I feel like that's part of it. And obviously, it's a story that could be told 1,000 times over in the States. There's so many examples of that kind of rags to riches, maybe sometimes back to rag stories. Um, but I really wanted to focus on the legacy because it could have been so easy to frame the story as a cautionary tale, of not thinking too big or trying to fly too close to the sun. Um, but yeah, we wanted to do something different, and I'm so happy that you liked it, Jason, and that it's finding eyeballs over there.
One thing that I thought was really inspirational is the name of the film and the name of the company, Dawn Raid. Can you talk about a little where that comes from? Because that's part of the history of South Auckland, which I had no clue about, and I don't think most people do.
In the 70s, there was economic collapse in the early 70s because of the Arab-Israeli war. And like so often happens when the economy goes down, it's immigrants who are blamed. And at that time, the immigrants to New Zealand were from the Pacific Islands, places like Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, and they were the ones targeted. And the police used to go to their homes before dawn, and it affected me and my family and all our community. It was a real dark time in our history where they would kind of raid people's homes. I guess similar to the ICE raids that maybe you experienced in the States in the last couple of years. But they would raid people's homes, take them to jail, and then deport them straight away. Even though for the previous 20 years, they kind of cast a blind eye to the rules because we needed labor. So this company, when they started, took that name Dawn Raids, which was always a negative thing for us because it was a painful memory of that horrible time. But they took that as their name to turn it into a positive, I guess, and it worked. Nowadays in New Zealand, when people say Dawn Raid, people think of that hip hop company. They don't, as well as the horrible stuff that used to happen to our community in the more racist 70s and 80s.
For you, I mean, having made this film and shaped it, and now it's getting out to the world and getting distribution, what do you want people to come away with it? Like after they see it, is it? Like you mentioned, it could be a cautionary tale, but what do you think the best scenario would be for somebody when they walk away from Dawn Raid?
I never like kind of telling people what they should feel at the end of a story. I just like hearing what they do feel, and what I hear a lot, and the sense I got from you in your review and watching it is the very human thing of having a dream and going for it. And sometimes it sucks, and sometimes it doesn't come off, but sometimes it does. But there's always peaks and troughs, and so I guess that's what I wanted people to see. And I guess even like you said, even if you only think New Zealand is Lord of the Rings or whatever, seeing a story like this that's so specific to a certain place and a certain culture, all that does is kind of reinforce the connection that we have. Because if you're sitting in Brooklyn, New York, and you're watching this film about these two cats from South Auckland and what they tried to do, and you finish watching that and not even being a hip hop fan or knowing about New Zealand, it somehow gets through to you on some level as a human. That's what I love. I love it. I mean, it's the same with me when I watch a Ingmar Bergman film from Sweden, or a film from Czechoslovakia or from Lebanon where I don't even speak the language. But that's the power of film, right? It comes through the screen and you go, far out. Humans, we're all the same. And I don't mean to, I'm not saying that in a way of homogenizing us, because we have our differences, but fundamentally we're built the same. And I feel like the more people in the world that realize that, the kind of better things will be. And I think that's one of the real powerful things that storytelling and cinema in particular can do.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's why we tell stories, and that's why it's powerful when we see stories from other places. I also think music does the same thing, and I was moved by the music in the film, even though it wasn't my history or my music kind of thing. But I saw what it did for them, and I think through them you see the power of this music. And I'm in Brooklyn. This is kind of like one of the birthplaces of hip hop.
Oh, absolutely. You're just down the road from where it all began, right?
Yeah, I mean we're here, and like a lot of that stuff started in the '70s after the '77 blackout. When guys raided stores and stole turntables and speakers and stuff so that they could make their own music. Coming from that, it really does go around the world. I mean, it's incredible how far it travels, and because not only did they kind of start a business and start making money, and but they also discovered artists that the world would never see otherwise, and they transformed a community. They really turned that part of South Auckland around, where
Yeah.
it was considered like one of the most dangerous places in New Zealand. And that's inspiring too, because it wasn't, even though they were young guys, it wasn't just about them. And I think that's a tremendous lesson to take away from it as well. Like it's it's not just about you or the artist. It's about what you can do for your community, and it's also about how you change the world. And they also, well, I won't spoil the film, but they did get it around the world, and they're still going, which is great,
Yeah.
even though it's a kind of a tremendous lesson in trial and error,
Yeah.
as so many things in the arts are.
Yeah.
Think about how many times you've tried something and failed and had to try again. Like it's rinse and repeat, man. Like it's
Yeah.
uh,
Tell me, Jason, were you surprised to see Judd Apatow in the film?
that was crazy. I was, but again, I don't want to spoil it, but that stuff was cool, and because I was wondering, like, well, how is this going to end up, and the ending surprised me, and that's great because people kind of forget about documentaries is that they are supposed to be entertaining films. They're not just, here, eat your vegetables, listen to this talking head, historical figure kind of thing. They're movies, and they have plot twists and turns and things like that.
Yeah, yeah,
And they have colorful personalities and characters. Like, you have real protagonists in this film, and that's all great stuff. And that's some of the stuff that I like the most, was just not, because I kind of kept waiting. I was like, all right, this is going really well. Like, I kept seeing the curve go up and up and up, and I went, something's gonna happen.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that's great. I was hooked in.
Yeah, that's I used to feel like documentaries were like that, were like Eat Your Vegetables, until I saw When We Were Kings. Did you ever see that?
Oh, fantastic film.
And that just blew me away. A story that could have heroes and villains and plot twists and light and shade, and so that really influenced me a lot. Films like that. Because I think that was one of the first docos that really worked in features. I think until then, docos were always on the boring TV network, on a Sunday night or something, and it would always be a very ponderous, usually English sounding voice. But yeah, that's a film that really influenced me a lot. And also, I guess as an actor and as a playwright too, you can take those elements from the traditional 5-act storytelling structure, of a movie or a play or a story, and you apply that to a doco. And if the elements are already there, you don't have to do much, fiddling around. You just kind of tell everyone what happened. And it's funny how in life stories do tend to have those peaks and troughs, and sometimes it just plateaus and nothing happens too. But yeah, if you look real closely, you can see it all.
It's the mark of a good movie when you have that, because so much of doc storytelling is editing. I'm sure there were lots of boring things, lots of non-interesting things that you cut out from the film, and you try to get the best stuff and show us the peaks and valleys and the conflict and all that kind of stuff. You're doing all the same types of storytelling as if you were writing a screenplay. And I don't know if enough people know that, how much narrative skill goes into telling a documentary. What about, do you have anything planned next? Are you going to do another doc? Do you want to do a fictional narrative movie? Do you plan to direct again?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a TV series that we're in pre-production for now, so I get to practice my directing chops. In the States, you might see me. There's a Taika Waititi is bringing out 2 films this year, as well as Thor. There's a film called Next Goal Wins, which is based on a documentary, actually. And it was a 2012 doco about the American Samoan soccer team, and Taika has adapted that into a feature, starring Michael Fassbender. And that comes out this year, and I'm in that. So yeah, acting, but yeah, more directing. We've got a TV show to make, and then see what happens after that.
Fantastic. Do you play a footballer in that one?
I play the No, I'm too old for that. I play the president of the American Samoan Football Federation.
So, for people who want to find out more about Dawn Raid, and people who want to find it online or find more out about you, where can they find you guys online?
Dawn Raiders on all the streaming platforms. Look for it. It's out there. As you said, Universal have done a really awesome job of getting it out there. So it's pretty easy to find on all your favorite platforms. And you'll find me. I'll be down here in New Zealand, but I'll be hopefully coming up there. And just, yeah, there's some cool stuff happening. And it's been awesome to talk to you, Jason. And thank you so much for spreading the word of our little film in the home of hip hop, where it all began. And I think Americans in particular might be quite surprised to watch this because, as I said, New Zealand, it's always hobbits and mountains. But, there's a lot of different sides to this country, and Dawn Raid features a very interesting story about one particular side.
It's the stories that don't get told often that are the most interesting, and the ones that need to be heard. And I'm really glad that that the movie got out. And I would be anxious to see what audiences say about it here. I think they'd be really surprised by it, and I think they would like it a lot. Anyway, I'm going to let you go. Thanks so much for spending your morning in the future with me. And when you do something again, please come back and talk about it. I'd love to have you back.
For sure. Hopefully in real this time, next time. Hopefully it'll
Maybe
be
if we can get you to Brooklyn, or if I can get to New Zealand, we'll do it.
All right, Jason. Take care, brother. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for taking this trip down the rabbit hole. For more of our content, including our movie reviews, visit our website, norestfortheweekendpodcast.com. Don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. And now you can subscribe on YouTube, youtube.com/getbehindtherabbit. Once again, I'd like to thank my guest, Oscar Kightley, and our sponsor, JMR Rentals. For Behind the Rabbit Productions, I'm Jason Godbey. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.